What if the thing you call your mind does to actually belong to you? What if the voice narrating your life, judging your choices, replaying your memories, and predicting your future isn't a solid commander at all, but a temporary pattern that feels personal only because it's happening inside your head? That idea should disturb you, because if it is true, then the foundation of your identity isn't as stable as you think. And if your identity isn't stable, then what exactly are you protecting, defending, and building your entire life around? You wake up every day assuming there is a central you behind your eyes, steering your decisions, authoring your thoughts, directing your emotions. It feels obvious, it feels undeniable, but obvious does mean accurate. The sense of being a thinker inside your skull might be the most convincing illusion you ever experienced. Thoughts appear. You don't see them forming. You don't watch them being assembled piece by piece. They simply arrive. A memory shows up. A worry intrudes. A desire pulls at you. And only after they arrive do you claim them as yours. Pause for a second and look closely at your own experience before your next thought appears. Can you predict exactly what it will be? Can you choose it in advance? Or does it simply surface on its own? If you're honest, it surfaces, it emerges, it happens. Then almost instantly, you take ownership of it. You say, I thought that, but the process that created it was hidden from you. The machinery worked in silence and awareness showed up late to the meeting. That should shake you more than it does, because you build your confidence, your guilt, your pride, and your shame around this internal stream. You believe you are the author of the story running in your head. But what if you are mostly the audience? What if the mind is less like a CEO issuing commands and more like a weather system generating patterns based on pressure, memory, conditioning, and biology? Storms form. Sunshine appears. Clouds pass. And in the middle of it all, you stand there saying, this is me. The disturbing part is that the brain is complex. It's that your sense of self might be an after effect rather than a source. The feeling of control may arrive after the neural processes have already set things in motion. You experience the intention, and it feels like you created it. But the spark may have ignited before you were consciously aware of it. That means your certainty about being the ultimate decision maker could be exaggerated. Look at how quickly emotions take over. Anger flares before you reason through it. Fear tightens your chest before logic has a chance to respond. Attraction pulls you before analysis weighs the pros and cons. These reactions are fast, automatic, efficient. They evolved long before modern self-reflection. And then your conscious mind steps in, crafting explanations. It tells a story about why you reacted the way you did. It makes the response feel intentional, deliberate, chosen. But explanation is not the same as authorship. You have been trained since childhood to believe there is a solid core inside you, a permanent identity that thinks, decides, and acts. You were given a name. You were told, this is who you are. Over time, memories attached to that label, preferences formed, beliefs stacked up. And eventually, the narrative became so continuous that it felt like a single, unbroken entity moving through time. Yet that continuity might be constructed moment by moment, stitched together by memory and language. Memory itself is not a perfect recording. It is reconstructed every time you recall it. That means your past is not a fixed archive, but a living rewrite. And if your past is fluid, then the self built from that past is also fluid. Still, you cling to it, you defend it. You feel threatened when someone challenges it. Because without that stable story, who are you? This is where the idea becomes unsettling. If the mind is a process instead of a possession, then you are not a static object. You are activity. You are patterns firing, habits repeating, attention shifting. The sense of being a thinker might simply be the brain modeling itself. A representation, a useful interface, but not a tiny pilot sitting behind your eyes pulling levers. And yet every decision in your life is filtered through this model. You say, I chose this career. I fell in love. I failed. I succeeded. The language reinforces ownership. It reinforces a central agent. But beneath that language, there may be networks of causes and conditions shaping outcomes long before conscious awareness stamps them with approval. This doesn't mean you are powerless. It means the structure of power is different than you assumed. It means control might not look like domination over thoughts, but awareness of how they arise. It means identity might not be a fixed essence, but a shifting configuration. And that realization strips away comfort. Because if your mind isn't a solid thing you possess, then you can hide behind it. You can say, that's just how I am. as if it is carved in stone. You can treat your impulses as sacred expressions of a permanent self. You have to confront the possibility that much of what you call me is habit, conditioning, and automatic pattern recognition running at high speed. That is the disturbing idea. The self feels solid. It feels personal. It feels unquestionable. But under scrutiny, it behaves like a process unfolding in real time. And if that process can be examined, influenced, and reshaped, then the identity you protect so fiercely is not a fixed truth. It is a construction happening right now, and that should make you uncomfortable. You say, my thoughts. You say, my feelings. You say, my decisions. You wrap them in possessive language, as if ownership proves control, as if labeling them yours somehow makes them originate from a central, conscious self. But pause for a moment and look closer. Watch your own mind as it operates for even a few minutes. Thoughts appear suddenly, like sparks igniting in a dark room. Emotions surge without warning, pulling attention, shaping behavior, bending decisions. Impulses push against reason, and you only notice them once they've already arrived. There is no premeditation. There is no conscious drafting committee. There is only emergence, a spontaneous choreography that feels like it belongs to you because it is happening in the space you inhabit. The illusion of ownership is seductive because it reinforces identity. It makes you feel like an author, writing your life one deliberate stroke at a time. But the reality is far less reassuring. Consider how many thoughts arise before any reflection occurs. A memory surfaces, a worry intrudes, a desire flares. The mind generates them without invitation, often with no logical reason, no conscious intent, and only then do you step in, retrofitting explanations, taking credit as if your approval validates their existence. This process happens hundreds, maybe thousands of times a day. Yet almost every thought is first noticed, then appropriated, then narrated as mine, despite its origin being entirely outside conscious control. This pattern suggests a deeper truth, a central self. The I you believe is steering your mind may be more of a witness than a commander. The observer watches the currents of thought, sometimes steering, sometimes caught in the tide. The feeling of control, of being in charge, is compelling because it appears after the fact. Awareness is like the spotlight following the actors on stage, illuminating the play that has already begun. It gives the impression that the mind is under direction, but the direction often comes from systems operating silently, beneath conscious notice. Look at how quickly emotions dominate behavior. Anger erupts before reasoning catches up. Anxiety grips the chest before rational thought has a chance to weigh probabilities. Desire drives action before deliberation whispers caution. These reactions are fast, automatic, and ancient, optimized by evolution for survival, not for careful self-reflection. The conscious mind appears late, crafting stories and justifications to explain decisions that were already in motion. Pride, guilt, and shame arise not as authorship but as rationalizations, a way to maintain the illusion of agency after automatic patterns have acted. You have been conditioned to believe that your mind is a fixed and intentional self, but it is more like a river, flowing, unpredictable, shaped by unseen currents, and resistant to the illusion that it can be fully controlled. Memory itself challenges the notion of ownership. Every recollection is reconstructed rather than retrieved. Every memory is influenced by current emotion, perspective, and context. The past, which you use to define identity and claim authority over your life, is not fixed. It is a living reconstruction, reshaped each time it is recalled. You rely on these memories to justify the continuity of self, to insist that you are a coherent entity moving through time. But if your past is fluid, then the foundation of ownership is equally unstable. Identity is not a monolith. It is stitched together, moment by moment, thought by thought, experience by experience, yet the mind treats it as unshakable. Every thought you claim, every feeling you believe is yours, arrives in a system that is the product of countless variables: genetics, upbringing, environment, culture, habits, trauma, and biology. These forces shape neural pathways long before awareness enters the equation. The mind is a highly complex network, processing stimuli, calculating probabilities, and reacting to context. Consciousness often functions as a commentary track, interpreting patterns after they've emerged. This retroactive narration strengthens the illusion of control, giving the mind the sense of authorship over what is fundamentally an emergent, interconnected process. It is a system giving feedback to itself, producing the sensation of a singular, consistent self. The moment of realization that my thoughts are not fully mine is destabilizing because it challenges everything we rely on for certainty. You have built your decisions, your confidence, and your emotional reactions on the idea that there is a solid, centralized agent behind the wheel. You defend your identity with language, belief, and habit, yet that agent may not be in control. The mind behaves like a dynamic ecosystem, each thought a signal interacting with others, not a product of a central authorial voice. The feeling of authorship is convincing only because it is consistent, repetitive, and reinforced by memory and language. Language itself reinforces the illusion of ownership. By calling something my thought or my feeling, you cement the belief that identity is fixed. Yet language is a tool of post hoc explanation. It labels, it categorizes, it narrates. It creates a sense of coherence in a system that is actually messy, emergent, and automatic. The stories you tell about your life strengthen patterns of self-recognition, reinforcing the false impression that you are the author of every internal experience. Ownership is a mental habit as much as it is a reality. This understanding leads to a subtle but radical truth. The self may not be the unbroken, controlling entity it appears to be. You are the culmination of processes you cannot directly observe, shaped by countless factors outside awareness, responding to an environment, and then told after the fact that the mind acted as you. The ownership you feel is powerful because it organizes experience, but it is also a convenient illusion. It is comforting because it gives meaning and identity, but disturbing because it may not reflect the actual mechanics of thought and consciousness. Awareness is present, but the machinery often moves independently of the conscious observer. Even the decisions you hold most dear, the choices you believe define character, may emerge before conscious deliberation has an opportunity to intercede. The mind is efficient, evolutionary, and automatic, and consciousness steps in to provide narrative coherence. That means much of what you attribute to volition, personal initiative, or deliberate thinking may be, in reality, pre-patterned responses. Ownership is post hoc. The sense of I am deciding this is a reconstruction, a narrative imposed on a system that has already acted. The takeaway is unsettling. If your thoughts and feelings are not entirely yours, then what are you protecting when you guard your identity so fiercely? What are you defending when you argue with reality, cling to habits, or insist on personal narratives? Perhaps the mind is less a fortress of self and more a living, breathing process, one that can be observed, influenced, and reshaped if the illusion of ownership is recognized. But the first step is seeing clearly. The thoughts arriving in your consciousness are not invitations to control, they are signals to notice. Recognize them, understand their origin, witness them. And then only then can real awareness begin to reshape what you call. The truth is brutal. You do not fully own your mind. You do not command it the way you think you do. And yet, acknowledging this gives the first real opportunity for influence, choice, and transformation. The illusion of authorship is strong, persistent, and convincing, but it is not absolute. The more you see it for what it is, the more space opens for real observation, real insight, and real freedom. You are not the driver of every thought, but you can learn to watch the road, notice the currents, and start understanding the system you inhabit. You may never fully own your mind, but you can begin to recognize that the mind owns itself, and the illusion of control is just the beginning of awareness. Neuroscience has revealed a truth that is as unsettling as it is fascinating. Decisions are often made in the brain before consciousness even notices them. The sense that a choice originates from a deliberate, rational self is mostly an afterthought, a narrative constructed to give coherence to what has already occurred. When a decision surfaces in awareness, it feels intentional, like a command executed by an author sitting behind the eyes. But the machinery that generates it has already been at work, firing neurons, weighing probabilities, connecting memories, and evaluating sensory input long before conscious thought is involved. The mind is not the commander it feels like, it is the narrator catching up to the story as it unfolds. The realization is shocking. The you, who believes it is in control, might be nothing more than an observer, arriving late to events that have already taken shape. This insight challenges the fundamental assumption of autonomy. Every day, countless choices are made, big and small, before awareness registers them. A subtle impulse to check a phone, a sudden irritation in traffic, a craving for food, or the decision to speak a particular word are all processed subconsciously first. Only after the neural system reaches a certain threshold does the conscious mind recognize the outcome and retroactively take credit. The brain is incredibly efficient, running thousands of processes in parallel, predicting outcomes, and initiating actions faster than reflection could ever keep pace with. The conscious mind, despite feeling like the helm, often functions like a passenger watching the wheel turn, believing that it is driving. The implications of this are profound. For centuries, people have attributed morality, creativity, and rationality to conscious choice, assuming that awareness equals authority. But if awareness is secondary, if consciousness is catching up to events rather than directing them, then notions of deliberate control must be re-examined. The pride taken in rational decision-making, the guilt for poor choices, and the confidence in personal agency may all rest on a shaky foundation. Awareness does not initiate, it interprets. Recognition comes after action. An explanation is built to rationalize events that have already occurred. The brain is a master strategist operating quietly, and consciousness is the witness applauding its own creation after the fact. This understanding forces a brutal reconsideration of responsibility. If much of what seems like intentional decision-making is automatic, generated below the threshold of awareness, what does that mean for the idea of personal control? It does not imply helplessness, but it strips away comfort. Many excuses, justifications, and rationalizations are based on the illusion that conscious thought is the starting point of action. The truth is far messier. The brain prepares responses, patterns past experiences, and predicts consequences before attention has a chance to weigh in. Conscious thought, as powerful as it feels, is often a reporter rather than a leader, summarizing events and explaining them in terms that maintain the sense of a cohesive, stable self. Emotions illustrate this principle vividly. Fear can grip the chest before reasoning engages. Anger can erupt and dominate behavior before the brain consciously evaluates the context. Attraction and desire can drive action before deliberation can assess long-term implications. The mind is fast, automatic, and evolutionarily optimized for survival and efficiency. Conscious thought, in contrast, is comparatively slow, reflective, and limited in processing capacity. The feeling of intentionality arises only when awareness interprets the rapid firing of neural networks, giving the impression of agency that is in many cases post hoc. This is disturbing because it undermines the intuitive belief that every action is a conscious, deliberate decision. The phenomenon extends to the moral and creative dimensions of life. People often take pride in their creativity, believing that conscious thought and inspiration produce original ideas. Yet, much of innovation comes from subconscious processing connections made below the surface that only later emerge into awareness. Similarly, moral judgments often arise as automatic responses shaped by upbringing, cultural conditioning, and neural wiring, long before conscious evaluation weighs in. The conscious mind interprets and rationalizes, constructing a narrative that feels like authorship, but in reality it is frequently after the fact. The mind operates like a highly sophisticated orchestra, and consciousness is often the audience applauding the symphony it believes it composed. Even simple choices demonstrate this principle. Consider deciding what to eat, what to say, or which route to take. Subconscious patterns of preference, habit, and learned response fire instantaneously, producing impulses that feel voluntary. By the time the conscious mind notices, the outcome is already underway. Ownership of the decision is an illusion created by the sequence of perception and awareness. Thoughts, feelings, and actions are coordinated by complex systems that operate without conscious input, making consciousness seem like the driver while it is often only a passenger with the privilege of post-event commentary. The truth disrupts the comforting notion of a singular, centralized self in control. The brain is not a monarchy with a single ruler issuing commands. It is a complex network with multiple centers of influence, many operating below awareness. Decisions arise from this network, and consciousness interprets and integrates them into a coherent narrative. The mind feels authoritative because the brain is efficient, patterns are consistent, and explanations are convincing. Yet, authority is largely an impression created by timing. The mind believes it is leading because it interprets outcomes in a way that preserves coherence and identity, even if the actual initiation occurred outside awareness. This realization offers both a shock and an opportunity. Recognizing that decisions may precede conscious awareness does not render one powerless. It allows for strategic intervention. Awareness can observe patterns, notice impulses, and gradually reshape habitual responses. By understanding the mechanics, the observer can influence the system from within, adjusting inputs and focus to gradually guide outcomes. The key is acknowledging the separation between emergence and narrative, between automatic action and post hoc interpretation. Only by seeing this distinction can true influence be exercised over the processes that create. The harshest truth is this: much of what is attributed to conscious agency is borrowed from systems operating silently beneath perception. Pride, blame, and moral judgment are frequently misassigned because the timing of awareness deceives the mind into claiming authority. The mind experiences control as a post hoc illusion, a convincing but manufactured sense of authorship. Understanding this shifts the way responsibility, identity, and choice are conceptualized. Control is not about initiating every action consciously. It is about noticing, influencing, and shaping patterns once their mechanics are understood. In accepting this, there is an unsettling clarity. Consciousness is powerful, but its power is largely interpretive. The mind operates independently and rapidly, with awareness arriving late to the party. Recognizing this fact strips away the comforting illusion of absolute control, leaving a raw opportunity. Influence the system consciously, understand the patterns, and act with insight rather than assumption. Decisions, thoughts, and feelings are not always authored by the self, but they are visible, interpretable, and ultimately modifiable by the attentive observer. The apparent command may be a performance, but understanding its mechanics allows deliberate engagement with the performance itself. In physics, observation does more than record reality, it actively shapes it. In psychology, attention works in a similar way, influencing not only what is noticed but what exists in experience. The act of observing, of focusing consciousness on a thought, an emotion, or a sensation, changes how it manifests and how it behaves. Fear, when closely examined, becomes more vivid, more gripping, more consuming. Anxiety spreads faster when it is observed constantly, feeding on itself and the attention it receives. Joy and possibility, on the other hand, grow when recognized, nurtured, and given space. The mind is not a static object contained in the skull, it is a dynamic process, a field of activity constantly shaped and reshaped by where attention is directed. What is focused on expands, and what is ignored fades, often leaving behind patterns that go unnoticed until they dominate perception. Consider how often reality is filtered through this lens of attention. The moments deemed important are not inherently more significant, they are simply where focus has landed. Patterns of thinking, feeling, and reacting are reinforced by repeated observation. The mind operates like a sculptor with an invisible chisel, carving experience out of raw perception, using attention as the tool. Each thought given energy solidifies into habit. Each emotion observed without interference deepens its roots. Conscious awareness functions both as magnifier and amplifier. By noticing certain aspects of experience and neglecting others, perception is not merely recording reality, it is creating it in real time, layer by layer, moment by moment. This filtering effect is more powerful than it appears, because it operates continuously and often unconsciously. Daily routines, repeated worries, habitual judgments, and persistent self-talk shape the mind without deliberate intent. The observer effect in the mind is relentless. Attention selects, prioritizes, and intensifies. Thoughts that are scrutinized become entrenched. Fears that are monitored grow stronger. Optimism that is ignored diminishes. Patterns of thought and emotional response, reinforced by repeated attention, solidify into structures that appear natural, inevitable, and permanent. What feels like a fixed personality is often a reflection of the mental and emotional patterns that have been repeatedly observed and reinforced over years. The mind is not simply passively responding to stimuli. It is actively participating in the formation of its own reality. Consciousness does not merely witness events, it amplifies them, prioritizes them, and, in doing so, alters the trajectory of mental and emotional patterns. This means that where focus is placed has profound consequences. Attention is not neutral, it is a force. The objects of attention, whether thoughts, emotions, sensations, or external events, are shaped and sometimes transformed by the very act of noticing them. Reality in the mind is mutable, not fixed, and the degree of influence is far greater than most realize. What is allowed to occupy the spotlight of attention grows in prominence, and what is ignored diminishes or disappears entirely. The consequences of this are both liberating and alarming. It means that much of what dominates experience, whether fear, anger, desire, or hope, is shaped not solely by external events, but by patterns of focus. Minds that habitually dwell on problems amplify problems. Minds that repeatedly seek solutions reinforce pathways to resolution. This understanding highlights a brutal truth. The subjective experience of reality is not an objective mirror of the world, it is a construction shaped by attention. The thoughts and emotions that feel most real are often those that have been habitually observed, reinforced, and magnified by focus. Reality, within the mind, is flexible, contingent, and highly sensitive to where awareness is applied. Patterns emerge because repeated observation strengthens neural pathways, making certain responses automatic and effortless. What is noticed frequently becomes easier to notice again. Attention acts like fertilizer, feeding the growth of thoughts and behaviors. Worries that are constantly monitored become dominant. Self-criticism that is repeatedly focused on becomes habitual. Doubts that are constantly observed grow into limiting beliefs. Conversely, positive practices, curiosity, and reflection that are observed and nurtured can create new pathways, new responses, and new ways of experiencing life. The mind responds to attention like clay responds to hands, moldable, reactive, and capable of being reshaped with deliberate effort. This phenomenon underscores a disquieting reality. Much of what seems fixed about personality, habit, and mental state is not inherent but reinforced. The behaviors, emotions, and tendencies that feel unavoidable are often the product of repeated focus over time. What is left unnoticed, unexamined, and unchallenged can grow unchecked, quietly directing experience in ways that are nearly invisible until their effects dominate perception. The mind as field of activity is alive, reactive, and sensitive to input, and the observer as role is more active than imagined. Each moment of attention has consequences, whether conscious or unconscious, deliberate or automatic. The observer effect also explains why self-awareness is both powerful and dangerous. The act of paying attention to thought and emotion changes their quality, intensity, and trajectory. Reflection, when deliberate, can cultivate clarity, insight, and control. However, habitual rumination, obsessive focus, or unintentional observation of negative patterns can entrench limitation and reinforce destructive cycles. Consciousness amplifies what it notices, and because most attention is habitual, much of what is strengthened in the mind is unexamined. The illusion of a fixed self is perpetuated because attention consistently reinforces existing patterns rather than interrogating them. Furthermore, the mind cannot distinguish inherently between constructive and destructive focus. It simply magnifies what is present in awareness. Repeated attention to scarcity creates more scarcity. Repeated attention to fear intensifies fear. Conversely, attention to mastery, curiosity, or gratitude strengthens those qualities. The act of observing does not create moral weight, only magnitude. The mind grows the seeds that are repeatedly watered by focus, whether conscious or unconscious. The observer, therefore, has enormous influence, often without recognizing the mechanics behind it. Awareness functions as both magnifier and amplifier, shaping perception and reinforcing the mental ecosystem that defines experience. The unsettling conclusion is that reality in the mind is fluid, reactive, and constructed in real time by attention. What seems stable, permanent, and fixed, the patterns of thought, emotion, and perception exist because of repeated focus, not because it is inherently unchangeable. Fear, habit, desire, and belief are strengthened by observation, and what is neglected fades or diminishes. Awareness does not simply witness the mind, it creates the context in which patterns solidify, intensify, and persist. Consciousness is not passive, it is the field in which mental life is cultivated, nurtured, and amplified. The mind is not a rigid container for experience. It is an evolving, responsive process, continuously shaped by where attention lands. Each moment of focus matters, whether acknowledged or ignored, deliberate or habitual, because attention itself molds reality within the mind. You are not as solid as you think. The identity you protect, defend, and explain to the world feels stable, consistent, permanent. But look closer, and it begins to fracture. What you call yourself is not a fixed object sitting somewhere inside your head. It is a pattern, a constantly updating process stitched together from memory, habit, emotion, and repetition. It feels solid only because it repeats. Every memory you rely on to define who you are is reconstructed each time you access it. It is not replayed like a recording. It is rebuilt, influenced by your current mood, your present beliefs, and your latest experiences. That means your past is not frozen. It is fluid. And if your past is fluid, then the identity built from it is fluid too. Yet you treat it like concrete. You say that as just who I am. You say, I've always been this way. You say, people don't change. But those statements are built on repetition, not truth. Your brain strengthens what it uses. Thoughts repeated become easier to think again. Reactions repeated become automatic. Emotional responses rehearsed over years become personality traits. You weren't born with most of the traits you now defend. They were practiced into existence. Confidence can be trained. So can insecurity. Patience can be developed. So can anger. Optimism can be strengthened. So can doubt. Neural pathways do not care about your identity. They care about repetition. This is the disturbing part. What feels like a deep, authentic self may simply be a well-rehearsed pattern, a collection of responses that became efficient because they were used frequently. The brain optimizes for efficiency, not truth. If you repeatedly react with defensiveness, defensiveness becomes faster. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, avoidance becomes automatic. Over time, these patterns fuse into something that feels personal. But personal does not mean permanent. Think about how much of your behavior is predictable. The same triggers produce the same reactions. The same criticism produces the same internal story. The same challenges create the same excuses. That predictability is not destiny. It is conditioning. It is wiring strengthened through repetition. You call it personality. Biology calls it plasticity. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you think, what you focus on, and how you behave. The structure of your mind adapts to your habits. If you repeatedly tell yourself a story about being incapable, your brain strengthens that narrative. If you repeatedly act with courage despite fear, new pathways form. Identity is not a statue carved once and left untouched. It is clay, shaped daily by action and attention. But here is the harsh realization: most of that shaping happens unconsciously. Family influences your early beliefs. Culture shapes your values. School conditions your sense of intelligence. Social media nudges your desires. Trauma imprints fear responses. Praise builds certain behaviors. Criticism builds others. Over time, these influences layer on top of each other, forming patterns so consistent that they feel like essence. And then you defend them. You defend your anxiety as realism. You defend your temper as passion. You defend your avoidance as caution. But defense does not equal truth. It equals familiarity. The brain prefers familiar over beneficial. Familiar feels safe, even when it limits you. That is why change feels threatening. Not because it is impossible, but because it disrupts the pattern that has defined you. If identity is pattern-based, then altering your behavior threatens the continuity of self, and the mind resists that disruption. This resistance creates the illusion of permanence. When you attempt to change and feel discomfort, you interpret that discomfort as proof that change is unnatural. But discomfort is simply the friction of rewiring. It is the nervous system adjusting to a new pattern. Here is another uncomfortable truth: much of what you believe about yourself is outdated programming. Beliefs formed in childhood still operate in adulthood. Fears learned in one environment still shape decisions in a completely different context. Patterns that once protected you now limit you. Yet because they are familiar, they feel authentic. Authenticity, in many cases, is just repetition. The sense of a continuous self, moving through time, is maintained by memory and narrative. You tell yourself stories about who you are. You repeat them internally. You share them externally. Each retelling strengthens the pattern. The more you narrate an identity, the more your brain reinforces it. Eventually, the story becomes indistinguishable from reality. But stories can be edited. If identity is pattern, and patterns are built through repetition, then change is not mystical. It is mechanical. It requires interruption and replacement. Old reactions must be paused. New responses must be practiced. Attention must shift. Behavior must adjust. And repetition must work in a new direction. The disturbing idea is not that you are powerless. It is that you are programmable. Your daily actions are either reinforcing your current identity or reshaping it. There is no neutral. Every repeated thought strengthens something. Every avoided discomfort preserves something. Every intentional act builds something new. You are not a fixed character trapped inside a predetermined script. You are an evolving pattern influenced by input, focus, and repetition. The version of you that feels stable today exists because it has been rehearsed the most. And here's the brutal clarity: if you do not consciously shape your patterns, they will shape you automatically. That means your environment matters. Your routines matter. Your internal dialogue matters. The content you consume matters. The people you surround yourself with matter, because all of it feeds the pattern. You can continue to defend the identity you inherited and reinforced unconsciously. Or you can acknowledge that it is flexible, malleable, and responsive to deliberate change. But you cannot pretend it is fixed. The self you experience right now is not a permanent structure. It is an active process. It is neural activity shaped by history and strengthened by habit. And processes can evolve. The discomfort you feel when questioning your identity is not a threat to your existence. It is evidence that identity is dynamic. A fixed object would not react. A living system does. You are not a statue. You are momentum. Momentum created by repeated thoughts, emotions, and actions. Momentum that can continue in the same direction or be redirected with effort. The most unsettling part is this: the version of you 5 years from now is being built by what you repeat today, not by what you intend, not by what you wish, by what you practice. If you want to know who you are becoming, examine your patterns. They are more honest than your intentions. You are not a solid self. You are a system in motion, and whether that motion traps you or transforms you depends on what you choose to repeat. Why does this idea feel so uncomfortable? Because the illusion of a solid, permanent self feels safe. It gives structure to chaos. It gives identity to experience. It gives you something stable to hold on to when everything else shifts. The belief that there is a fixed you at the center of your thoughts, emotions, and decisions creates psychological security. It allows you to predict yourself. It allows others to predict you. It creates continuity. And continuity feels like control. Without that illusion, uncertainty expands. If the self is not fixed, then your strengths are not guaranteed. Your weaknesses are not permanent. Your identity is not carved in stone. That realization threatens the internal story you've built for years. It shakes the foundation of who you think you are. And the mind resists anything that threatens its narrative stability. Certainty is comforting, even when it limits you. You would rather believe you are, just not disciplined, than confront the possibility that discipline is a skill that requires discomfort and repetition. You would rather believe you are bad at relationships than admit that communication patterns can be examined and rewired. You would rather cling to the label than face the responsibility of change. The illusion of a fixed self provides ready-made explanation. That is just how I am. I've always struggled with that. I am not the type of person who does that. These phrases feel honest. They feel authentic. But most of the time they are shields. They protect the continuity of identity. They protect familiarity. They protect comfort. Because if identity is flexible, then stagnation becomes a choice. The brain prefers predictability. Predictability reduces cognitive load. It conserves energy. A stable self-concept allows decisions to be automated. You don't have to evaluate every action from scratch if you already know who you are. The label does the work for you. It narrows options. It simplifies choices. It eliminates uncertainty. But simplification is not the same as truth. When you adopt a rigid identity, you shrink possibility. You filter out behaviors that don't match the narrative. You ignore evidence that contradicts it. You gravitate toward environments that reinforce it. Slowly, the story becomes self-fulfilling. The mind begins defending the identity it created. Criticism feels like a threat, not because it is necessarily wrong, but because it challenges the internal model of self. Change feels dangerous not because it is impossible, but because it disrupts psychological continuity. Even positive transformation can feel destabilizing if it conflicts with long-held beliefs about who you are. This is why growth often feels uncomfortable. It isn't just about learning something new. It is about shedding an old layer of identity, and shedding identity feels like loss. But here, as the truth, the loss is imaginary. The discomfort is transitional. What feels like a threat to yourself is actually friction between old patterns and new possibilities. The illusion of permanence convinces you that deviation equals betrayal. If you act differently than you usually do, it feels inauthentic. If you try something outside your identity, it feels forced. But authenticity is often just consistency with your past patterns. And past patterns are not sacred. They are learned. The danger of clinging to a rigid identity is that it turns habits into destiny. It transforms preferences into limitations. It converts temporary states into permanent traits. And once that happens, excuses multiply. You avoid risk because you're not that type of person. You tolerate dissatisfaction because that is just how life is for you. You repeat mistakes because you always mess things up. Each statement reinforces the illusion of permanence. Each repetition strengthens the pattern. The mind seeks coherence. It wants your actions to align with your identity. So if you believe you are disorganized, you unconsciously act in ways that confirm it. If you believe you are unlucky, you interpret neutral events as proof. Identity shapes perception. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior reinforces identity. It becomes a loop. Breaking that loop feels threatening because it creates internal conflict. Acting against your established identity generates cognitive dissonance. The brain dislikes dissonance. It prefers harmony, even if that harmony keeps you small. But what if the discomfort of change is not evidence of impossibility? What if it is evidence of expansion? If the self is not a fixed object but a dynamic process, then growth is not betrayal. It is evolution. You are not abandoning who you are updating it. And updates require temporary instability. The illusion of a permanent self encourages passivity. It suggests that traits are fixed and circumstances define potential. But neuroplasticity contradicts that narrative. The brain adapts. It rewires. It responds to repeated effort. Skills develop. Habits shift. Emotional responses recalibrate. The resistance you feel when confronting change is not proof that you cannot change. It is proof that the current pattern is deeply ingrained. Patterns resist disruption. That resistance is mechanical, not mystical. It is neural efficiency protecting existing pathways. The more a behavior has been repeated, the easier it is to repeat again, the harder it feels to alter. But difficulty is not impossibility. It is simply the weight of repetition. Clinging to the illusion of permanence keeps you safe from effort. If you are fixed, there is nothing to attempt, no risk to take, no discomfort to endure, no responsibility to own. But if you are dynamic, then inaction becomes a decision. The uncomfortable reality is that much of what feels like fate is repetition. Much of what feels like personality is conditioning. Much of what feels like limitation is habit. And habits can change. The illusion of a solid self whispers that transformation is unrealistic. It convinces you that improvement is for other people. It tells you that you are defined by your past. But the brain does not care about your narrative. It responds to input, attention, and repetition. If you consistently act with courage, courage strengthens. If you consistently practice discipline, discipline grows. If you consistently challenge negative thought patterns, they weaken. The mind adapts whether you believe in change or not. The real threat is not that you lack a fixed self. The real threat is that you mistake comfort for truth. That you defend limitations because they feel familiar. That you confuse stability with authenticity. You are not a statue standing still in time. You are a process unfolding moment by moment. The discomfort of recognizing that process is not danger. It is awareness. And awareness disrupts illusions. Once you see that identity is fluid, excuses lose power. That is just who I am. Stop sounding like wisdom and start sounding like surrender. If the self is dynamic, then growth is not optional. It is constant. The only question is whether it happens intentionally or accidentally. The illusion of permanence keeps you asleep. It keeps you repeating. It keeps you safe. But safety without growth is stagnation. And stagnation is simply repetition without awareness. The moment you accept that your identity is not fixed, the rules change. You are no longer defending a permanent structure. You are shaping an evolving one. And that realization is uncomfortable for a reason. It removes the hiding place. You blame lack of motivation. You blame circumstances. You blame timing. You blame other people. It feels easier that way. If the problem is outside you, then you don't have to confront what actually happening inside you. But the truth is far less flattering. Your brain is running scripts, automatic, rehearsed, reinforced through repetition. Every habit you have started as a choice once. A small action. A reaction, a response to discomfort. Repeat it enough times and the brain optimizes it. Neural pathways strengthen. The behavior becomes efficient, then automatic. Eventually it feels inevitable. You call it personality. It is pattern efficiency. The brain is designed to conserve energy. It turns repeated actions into shortcuts. The more you scroll when you are bored, the faster boredom triggers scrolling. The more you avoid difficult conversations, the faster discomfort triggers silence. The more you procrastinate, when tasks feel overwhelming, the quicker overwhelm triggers escape. You think you were choosing in those moments. But most of the time, the script has already started running. This is the brutal reality about your habits. They are not random. They are rehearsed futures. Repetition strengthens pathways. And attention strengthens pathways. Emotion strengthens pathways even faster. When you combine repetition with strong emotion, fear, excitement, shame, pleasure, the wiring deepens. That is why certain behaviors feel almost impossible to break. They aren't just mental preferences. They are reinforced circuits. You are not weak. You are wired. But wiring can change. Every time you react the same way, you cast another vote for that version of yourself. Every time you avoid discomfort, you reinforce avoidance. Every time you choose distraction over discipline, you strengthen distraction. Habits are not moral failures, they are neural momentum. And momentum does care about your intentions. It cares about direction. You can say you want success. You can say you want discipline. You can say you want growth. But your daily patterns reveal the truth. The brain does not respond to wishes. It responds to repetition. You are rehearsing who you will become. If you repeatedly wake up and delay responsibility, you rehearse delay. If you repeatedly complain instead of act, you rehearse helplessness. If you repeatedly seek comfort instead of challenge, you rehearse stagnation. And after months or years, the rehearsal becomes identity. Then you say, "This is just how I am." No, this is what you practiced. The uncomfortable part is recognizing how automatic most behavior is. Triggers lead to responses faster than conscious thought can intervene. Stress triggers old coping mechanisms. Criticism triggers defensiveness. Loneliness triggers distraction. Fatigue triggers indulgence. The script plays before awareness fully loads. And then the conscious mind steps in with excuses. It justifies. It rationalizes. It explains why the behavior made sense. But explanation does not erase repetition. The brain tracks what you do, not what you promise. Neural pathways do not strengthen when you plan to change. They strengthen when you behave differently. Intention without action leaves the script untouched. That is why motivation fades. Because motivation is emotional, habits are structural. Emotion fluctuates. Structure persists. You don't rise to your intentions. You fall to your systems. If your environment supports distraction, distraction wins. If your routine supports inconsistency, inconsistency wins. If your daily schedule lacks deliberate friction, comfort wins. The brain follows the path of least resistance. And you design that path through your repeated behaviors. This is inspirational. It is mechanical. Every time you open the same app at the same time, you strengthen that cue-response loop. Every time you delay a task and feel relief, your brain associates avoidance with reward. Relief becomes reinforcement. The mind is constantly calculating what works to reduce discomfort or increase pleasure. It does to evaluate long-term consequences very well. It prioritizes immediate feedback. That is why short-term comfort often defeats long-term growth. You know what you should do, but knowing is conscious. Habits are subconscious, and subconscious patterns run faster. Breaking a habit isn't about willpower alone. It is about disrupting the cue-response cycle. About inserting friction where there was ease and repetition, where there was avoidance. But here's the harsh realization: most people don't want to disrupt the script. They want results without rewiring. They want change without discomfort. That is not how the brain works. If repetition built the habit, repetition must dismantle it. If emotional reward reinforced it, new rewards must replace it. If environment triggered it, environment must shift. You are not fighting yourself. You are fighting automation. Automation feels powerful because it is efficient. It conserves energy. It resists change. The brain prefers the known over the uncertain, even if the known is limiting. That is why you return to the same behaviors after promising change. Not because you lack character, because the script is strong. But scripts can be rewritten. First step is brutal honesty. Stop pretending habits are accidents. Stop blaming mood. Stop blaming luck. Look at your patterns as if they are code running in the background. What triggers them? What reward follows? What emotion strengthens them? Patterns are predictable when observed carefully. The second step is interruption. Small, consistent, repeated, not dramatic transformation, not overnight reinvention. One disruptive response at a time. Pause before reacting. Delay the automatic move. Replace one behavior with a slightly better one. Not perfect. Better. That tiny interruption weakens the old pathway. Repeat it enough times, it strengthens a new one. It won't feel natural at first. It will feel forced, uncomfortable, slow. That is because efficiency hasn't shifted yet. But over time, the new response becomes easier. The brain adapts. The script updates. Here As the truth most avoid, your habits are building your future silently. Not your goals, not your dreams, your patterns. If your daily routine reinforces distraction, your future will reflect distraction. If your daily routine reinforces discipline, your future will reflect discipline. It is not dramatic, it is cumulative. Small actions repeated daily outweigh intense effort performed occasionally. You are always practicing something. The question is whether you are practicing limitation or growth. The disturbing reality is this: the version of you that exists 1 year from now is already under construction. And the construction crew is your habits. Every repetition is a brick. Every routine is cement. Every excuse is scaffolding holding the old structure in place. You can keep rehearsing the same script and pretend you are stuck. Or you can accept that stuck is simply well practiced. Your brain is not your enemy. It is adaptive machinery. It strengthens what you feed it. Feed it distraction, it builds distraction. Feed it discipline, it builds discipline. Feed it avoidance, it builds avoidance. Feed it courage, it builds courage. You don't need a new personality. You need new repetitions. Because in the end, habits are not small things. They are identity in motion. And identity in motion becomes destiny. You are not trapped. You are trained. And training can change. Here's the shift that changes everything. Stop trying to control every thought. Start observing them. That sounds simple, almost too simple, but it cuts straight through the illusion that you must dominate your mind to change your life. Control is exhausting. Observation is powerful. Most of the time, thoughts are treated as commands. A negative idea appears and is immediately believed. A fear surfaces and is instantly obeyed. A craving arises and action follows. There is no pause, no distance, no examination. The mind produces a signal, and behavior responds automatically. That automatic link is where most people lose their power. But the moment a thought is noticed, truly noticed without immediately reacting to it, something subtle shifts. The thought is still there, the emotion may still be present, but there is now space. And in that space, identity loosens its grip. A thought that says, "You can do this," feels absolute when it is fused with the self. It feels like truth. But when it is observed as a mental event, just a string of words generated by the brain, it loses authority. It becomes data instead of destiny. This is not about suppressing thoughts. Suppression strengthens them. Pushing a thought away often makes it louder. The shift is about seeing clearly. Watching the mind the way you would watch the sky. Clouds pass. Some are dark, some are light, but none of them are the sky itself. Thoughts are events. They are not identity. The mind generates thousands of them daily. Some are useful. Many are repetitive. A surprising number are negative or self-critical. If every one of those thoughts defined you, your identity would change minute by minute. But it does because deep down, there is awareness that notices them. That awareness is different from the thoughts themselves. When a surge of anger rises, it feels overwhelming. It feels like, "I am angry." But if it is observed carefully, it becomes anger is present. That small linguistic shift reflects a profound psychological shift. Instead of merging with the emotion, there is distance from it. Distance creates choice. Without distance, reaction is automatic. With distance, response becomes possible. This is where real influence begins. Not in forcing the mind to be silent. Not in pretending negative thoughts don't exist, but in recognizing that thoughts and emotions are processes happening within awareness, not commands issued by a fixed self. Most people are trapped in identification. They identify with every thought. They identify with every mood. If they feel anxious, they become an anxious person. If they fail once, they become a failure. If they feel doubt, they conclude they are incapable. But feelings fluctuate. Thoughts fluctuate. They rise and fall like waves. Identity only feels stable because awareness is constant. The shift is recognizing that you are not the content of your mind, you're the context in which that content appears. This realization changes how habits are interrupted. When a familiar impulse arises, scroll, procrastinate, lash out, it feels urgent. It feels necessary. But if that impulse is observed instead of obeyed immediately, it weakens. The brain expects automatic execution. When execution is delayed, even briefly, the old pattern loses momentum. Observation interrupts automation. That interruption may last only seconds at first. A pause before reacting. A breath before responding. A moment of noticing the urge without acting on it. But that pause is powerful. It signals to the brain that the script is no longer unquestioned. It introduces flexibility into a system built on repetition. The discomfort during that pause is real. The mind dislikes uncertainty, it prefers familiar loops. But discomfort is not danger. It is adaptation in progress. Observation also reveals how repetitive most thoughts are. The same worries replay, the same criticisms echo, the same fears resurface. Once this repetition becomes obvious, the illusion of originality fades. You realize you are not constantly generating new truths about yourself. You are replaying old recordings, and recordings can be replaced. When awareness catches a limiting thought and chooses not to engage with it, a new pathway begins forming. It may feel weak at first, fragile, but repetition strengthens it. Instead of arguing with every negative thought, simply noticing it reduces its power. Instead of believing every emotional surge, witnessing it reduces its intensity. Awareness does not eliminate mental content, it changes your relationship to it. This relationship shift is subtle but radical. It moves you from being controlled by thoughts to being informed by them. Thoughts become suggestions rather than orders. Emotions become signals rather than identities. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What is happening in my mind right now?" That question alone creates space. In that space, responsibility becomes clearer. Not responsibility for every thought that appears, that would be impossible, but responsibility for what is reinforced. You cannot control the arrival of every idea, but you can influence which ones are rehearsed, which ones are acted upon, and which ones are allowed to fade. Attention becomes intentional. Instead of feeding fear with constant rumination, attention can shift to action. Instead of feeding self-doubt with repeated internal criticism, attention can shift to small, concrete steps forward. This is not positive thinking. It is strategic awareness. The mind will continue generating thoughts. That will not stop. The goal is not silence. The goal is sovereignty over response. When you realize that a thought is just an event, its authority diminishes. When you realize that an emotion is temporary, its intensity softens. When you realize that identity is not fused with every mental fluctuation, freedom expands. The shift is simple but demanding. Observe before reacting. Notice before believing. Pause before obeying. That pause is where transformation begins, because in that gap between stimulus and response, the automatic script weakens and conscious choice strengthens. The more often that gap is used, the wider it becomes. The wider it becomes, the more flexible identity becomes. You are not trying to eliminate your mind. You are learning to stand slightly apart from it, not disconnected, not detached from reality, but grounded in awareness rather than entangled in every passing thought. And once you see that thoughts are events, not commands, not identity, not destiny, you stop being dragged by every mental current. You start steering. If the mind is a process shaped by focus and repetition, then responsibility becomes unavoidable. Not blame, not shame, responsibility. There is a difference. Blame looks backward and searches for fault. Responsibility looks forward and recognizes influence. If thoughts arise automatically and habits form through repetition, then the environment, the inputs, and the patterns you allow to continue are not neutral. They are shaping you. You cannot control every thought that appears in your mind. Random memories surface. Old fears echo. Uninvited doubts intrude. That is part of being human. But you can control what you do next. You can control what you reinforce. You can control what you feed. Every input is instruction. What you watch repeatedly becomes familiar. What you listen to repeatedly becomes normal. What you read repeatedly shapes your internal dialogue. Conversations, media, environments, routines, none of them are passive. They are programming material. The brain absorbs patterns constantly. It adapts to what it is exposed to. If negativity dominates your environment, negativity becomes easier to access. If distraction dominates your routine, focus weakens. If outrage dominates your information diet, calm reasoning erodes. This is not dramatic. It is biological. Neural pathways strengthen with use. Emotional responses intensify with repetition. Attention magnifies what it repeatedly lands on. Over time, the content you consume becomes the structure of your thinking. That is responsibility. It means you cannot pretend your environment doesn't matter. You cannot repeatedly expose yourself to chaos and expect clarity. You cannot rehearse comparison and expect confidence. You cannot normalize excuses and expect discipline. Every scroll is reinforcement. Every complaint is rehearsal. Every avoided challenge is confirmation. This is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of helplessness. It is easier to believe that external forces dictate your mental state. It is easier to blame stress, society, or circumstances, and yes, circumstances matter. Stress is real, pressure is real, trauma is real, but within those realities, patterns still form, and patterns still respond to repetition. Responsibility means recognizing that while you may not have chosen every influence in your life, you can choose what you continue to strengthen. Attention is a vote. Every time you dwell on a limiting belief, you cast a vote for it. Every time you interrupt it, you cast a vote against it. Every time you engage in a constructive action despite discomfort, you cast a vote for growth. Votes accumulate. You do not transform overnight. You transform through accumulated reinforcement. Small decisions repeated consistently shape neural architecture. That architecture shapes perception. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes results. This is why complaining feels temporarily relieving but long-term weakening. It rehearses helplessness. It reinforces a narrative where you are acted upon rather than acting. The brain learns that relief comes from venting rather than solving. Responsibility shifts that pattern. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the question becomes, "What response am I strengthening right now?" That shift is subtle but powerful. It redirects attention from circumstance to pattern. You cannot control every external event, but you can influence your internal reinforcement loop. If anger arises, you can rehearse escalation or restraint. If fear appears, you can rehearse avoidance or measured action. If doubt surfaces, you can rehearse surrender or persistence. The initial emotion may not be voluntary. The reinforcement is most people underestimate how quickly reinforcement builds identity. One repeated reaction becomes a habit. A habit repeated becomes a trait. A trait repeated becomes a story. And that story becomes the lens through which future experiences are interpreted. Responsibility means interrupting that progression early. It means catching the narrative before it solidifies. It means questioning the automatic thought before it becomes belief. It means choosing environments that challenge growth rather than justify stagnation. This is not about toxic positivity. It is not about denying struggle. It is about strategic input. If you want resilience, expose yourself to controlled discomfort. If you want focus, reduce distractions deliberately. If you want clarity, filter noise intentionally. The brain does not evolve in a vacuum. It evolves based on repeated exposure and response. This makes responsibility practical, not philosophical. Examine your daily inputs, examine your routines, examine your most common thoughts. They reveal what you are training. If your mornings begin with chaos, your mind rehearses reactivity. If your evenings end with mindless consumption, your brain rehearses passivity. If your conversations revolve around complaint, your identity rehearses victimhood. None of these are moral judgments. They are mechanical observations. You become what you repeatedly practice. Responsibility is not about perfection. It is about direction. A single disciplined action does not override months of avoidance. A single positive thought does not dismantle years of self-criticism. But consistent repetition shifts momentum. Momentum is powerful. If you consistently move in one direction even slowly, the path reshapes. Neural pathways adapt. Emotional responses recalibrate. Habits realign. The harsh truth is this: influence is always happening. If you are not consciously shaping it, unconscious forces are. Algorithms shape attention. Social dynamics shape beliefs. Cultural narratives shape values. If you do not filter and question what you consume, you will absorb it. Responsibility means reclaiming agency in that process. It means deciding what deserves your focus. It means limiting exposure to what weakens you. It means practicing responses that strengthen you. You may not control the first thought, but you control the second. You may not control the initial emotion, but you control the pattern that follows, and patterns define identity. If the mind is a dynamic process, then every day is construction. You are building something whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you are building intentionally. Responsibility is not heavy when understood correctly. It is empowering. It means you are not trapped by your past wiring. It means you are not doomed to repeat every automatic response. It means influence exists, even if control is limited. Control is about forcing outcomes. Influence is about shaping patterns. Influence compounds. Small improvements in input, small interruptions in habit, small shifts in focus repeated consistently reshape the system. That is responsibility. Not blaming yourself for every thought. Not punishing yourself for every mistake. But refusing to pretend that repetition has no consequence. Your mind is adaptive. It is responsive. It is constantly learning from what you feed it. Feed it intentionally. Because whether you take responsibility or not, the learning never stops. Stop waiting for clarity. It is not coming. Not from a book. Not from a guru. Not from another late-night spiral of overthinking. The uncomfortable truth is that you already understand enough. You have heard the ideas. You have felt the discomfort. You have seen the patterns in your own behavior. And still, you hesitate. You hesitate because action would force you to confront something terrifying, that your consciousness is not a passive observer but an active creator. Your experience of reality is not happening to you. It is happening through you. And that means your confusion, your stagnation, your repeated mistakes are not accidents. They are constructions. This is the final realization. Your mind is not a window. It is a projector. It throws interpretations onto a neutral world and then convinces you those interpretations are facts. You call it personality. You call it taste. You call it just the way things are. But it is pattern, habit, conditioning. And unless you question it, you will spend your entire life reacting to a movie your own brain is playing. That is disturbing because it strips away your favorite excuse. You can no longer say, "This is just how I am." The voice that says you are lazy, anxious, unlucky, behind, incapable, that voice is not an oracle. It is a loop, a neural pathway strengthened by repetition. Every time you believe it without inspection, you carve it deeper. Every time you act from it, you reinforce it. You are not trapped by destiny. You are trapped by rehearsal. And here comes the harsh truth most people avoid. You protect the very patterns that hurt you. You defend them. You justify them. You cling to them because they are familiar. Familiar feels safe, even when it is painful. So you stay in the same emotional cycles. You choose the same types of people. You respond to stress in the same destructive ways. Then you complain about the outcome. But the outcome is not random. It is consistent with the script your mind keeps replaying. Another brutal realization: your sense of self is negotiable. It feels solid. It feels permanent. But it is fluid. It shifts based on context, memory, expectation. The you at home is not the same as the you around friends. The you under pressure is not the same as the you on vacation. If your identity can change with environment, then it is not a fixed truth. It is a dynamic process. That means you are less defined than you think and more responsible than you want to admit. So what do you do with this? Not affirmations, not fantasy, not pretending you are already transformed. The shift is smaller, sharper, more ruthless. You start observing your thoughts as events, not commands. When your mind says you can do this, you do not argue. You do not obey. You simply notice. A thought has appeared. That is all. When your mind says they are judging you, you notice again. A prediction has appeared. Not a fact, a construction. This single move, noticing without immediately believing, begins to loosen the grip. It creates a fraction of space. And in that space, choice becomes possible. Tiny at first, uncomfortable, but real. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond deliberately. Instead of spiraling, you pause. Instead of defending your limitations, you question them. Do not expect applause. This work is invisible. No one will congratulate you for interrupting a negative pattern. No one will see the moment you choose courage over avoidance. But those invisible moments compound. They reshape neural pathways. They rewire expectation. They alter the lens through which you experience reality. And because your experience of reality is filtered through your mind, changing the filter changes your world. Here is the final challenge. Stop treating your consciousness as a mystery you can only admire from a distance. Treat it as a responsibility. Every interpretation you accept shapes your emotional life. Every belief you repeat strengthens or weakens a pathway. Every excuse you rehearse becomes easier next time. You are not just thinking thoughts, you are training a system. So train it intentionally. Catch one automatic reaction today and interrupt it. Question one assumption. Choose one action that contradicts your usual limitation. Not because it feels comfortable, not because you are motivated, but because you understand what is at stake. If your mind constructs your experience, then passively letting it run is surrender. Deliberately shaping it is power. And if you walk away from this idea unchanged, if you continue blaming circumstances while refusing to examine the lens through which you see them, then the disturbance you feel right now will fade. You will return to autopilot, the same loops, the same frustrations, the same explanations. Or you can decide that the most disturbing idea of all, that your consciousness is actively shaping your life, is also the most liberating. Because if your mind built the cage, it can also dismantle it. The question is not whether this idea is true. The question is whether you are brave enough to act as if it is.